Chapter 23. Most of the criticism of Mr. Gurdjieff and his method is curiously vindictive and personal. It is difficult for me to understand this sort of criticism for the simple reason that it never seems to take into account that there could have been any sort of personal responsibility in relation to Gurdjieff. This possibility is usually dismissed, or at least avoided, by the statement or the implication that Gurdjieff was so hypnotic or so compelling, or that there was something in his work that made it irresistible, that people were unable to save themselves from him. I certainly admit that Gurdjieff's personal magnetism, on the other hand, he made it very difficult for most people to become group members. In one instance that I remember very clearly, Gurdjieff was approached by a middle-aged American couple for help. The man was partially paralyzed, and it was implicit in their request for admission to the Priory that they hoped his work could do something about his condition. Gurdjieff made it eminently clear, in my presence, that no aspect of his work could possibly do anything about the actual physical condition of the man, except to help him to accept it, but he had no objection to their admission to the Priory, as long as they understood that nothing there would in fact any way help or alleviate the paralysis. In fact, at the beginning of the interview which took place at the Priory, he at first refused them permission to establish themselves there as students. It was only after he had made his conditions perfectly clear concerning the physical ailment that they were allowed to stay. I got to know the couple very well during their stay there. I was 13 at the time, and there was a period when I was assigned the work of cleaning their rooms. This was unheard of. Everyone else cleaned their own rooms, but the exception was made in their case as a form of courtesy, since the man was confined to a wheelchair and his wife was almost always with him, pushing him around the grounds in order that he could at least observe, if not participate in, the work that was going on. They stayed at the Priory for about 2 months, as I remember, and the wife particularly seemed to feel that she was getting something from being there. I don't know how her husband felt about this. I do know that when they left the Priory, they announced more accurately than she did that they intended to continue with his work in New York with the New York group. It was about 9 or 10 years later when I saw these people again. They made a particular effort to find me. I was very surprised to hear from them and very glad to see them. As a child I had liked them both. To my complete astonishment, when I did see them in New York, they spoke of Gurdjieff with enormous personal hatred in their voices. I was so startled that I could not say very much and did not know of any way to defend him. But I did listen to them both, and their long hateful harangue amounted to the fact that Gurdjieff was a fake, a charlatan, and a devil, mostly because he had not done anything about the man's physical condition. Wow. In my rather simple-minded way, I tried to remind them that he had warned them specifically and in my presence that there was nothing he could do about that condition, but I might as well have tried to reason with them in a foreign language. Hatred simply does not respond to reasoning. This was my first experience in connection with Gurdjieff, and clashing head-on with a totally emotional point of view, so emotional that reason was completely disregarded. I have come up against it since then on many, many occasions. Why is it that even now, years after Gurdjieff's death, the prevailing criticism of him is so entirely emotional and so rarely based on any fact? To me it has come to underlie Gurdjieff's own words about the savagery of what he called the feeling or emotional center in man. In my own personal experience in the world, quite apart from Gurdjieff, I am continually appalled at the force of emotional reactions in people and at the weakness of their reasoning power in emotional situations. In the case of Gurdjieff, I do not think it was his magnetism or his power that was the cause of the confusion. I think it was the expectations of the people who came into contact with him. I know of almost no one who was able to approach him and evaluate him from a detached, thinking point of view. Even the seemingly impartial admirers, and how could they be impartial and also admire, would sometimes be horrified and prejudiced against him because he was, in their view, dirty or insanitary. I, of all people, having cleaned his room for 2 years as a child, knew he could be dirty and insanitary by Western standards, but it had no more effect on me than the fact that he was a certain age or a certain height, what did his sanitary habits have to do with his knowledge or his abilities as a teacher? When I have asked that question, the reply always seems to be that a great teacher is of necessity clean. This seems to me to be the equivalent of accepting Christianity after an investigation of the bathing habits of Jesus Christ. Or is cleanliness next to godliness after all? And does the old saw actually refer to physical cleanliness? I have said in this book that I have no particular desire to defend Mr. Gurdjieff, and I suppose that the statement is not absolutely true, or at least not cut and dry. If there is an implied defense of him in this criticism of some of his followers and detractors, it is due to my impatience with the lack of impartial reasoning on the part of such people. They seem to see and then evaluate Gurdjieff through the emotional mist of their desires or wants or hopes, and never with clarity. Is it really all the fault of the teacher if a student does not get straight A's? All that Gurdjieff had to offer, as far as I know, was a teaching that was based on a great many other teachings, that was not necessarily new. If there was any novelty in it, it was in his method of teaching. But my question to his critics would have been, what made it so difficult either to accept or to reject him or his teaching? Why do they have to become so violently emotionally involved with it? I admit at once that I was emotionally involved with Gurdjieff as a man, and that he had enormous influence on my life, but I am emotionally involved with practically anyone I have known well, so why should or how could Gurdjieff be an exception? And emotional involvement does not prelude my awareness of the fact that such and such a person may have habits or traits that I may dislike or of which I may even disapprove. But is my approval of such affection going to be based on my observation of such things? In fact, can I take it upon myself to approve of anyone? Of course I have emotional reactions to people, but such reactions do not have the slightest effect on their individuality, or the totality of such people. They exist as they are in whatever way they choose, or happen to be led, which is something I cannot alter, even if I should wish to do so. The only thing I can do is to accept or reject such people in a personal sense. Life seems to me to be a predatory business by its very nature, and if a person is not useful, in the sense that there is some mutual valuable exchange on whatever level, to another person, why have a relationship with such a person? Cold-blooded, if you wish, but isn't the very expression cold-blooded a purely emotional one? If it were possible, I would do practically anything for my fellow man. Why not? But this should not be taken as an altruistic statement. Altruism is often a questionable motive, and usually an emotional one. In my periods of loving the world and feeling altruistic, I have found to my sorrow that there is anything I can do for anyone else anyway, certainly not in any helpful sense. I can share their lives, but only as long as sharing is a mutually profitable or enjoyable or rewarding process. Is there another way to live with people?